Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. And our guest today is Dan Schneider. He's Enterprise Platforms Product Specialist at NVIDIA, and Sandra Colner. She's GM Global Healthcare and Life Sciences at Dell Technologies. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, John.
Yeah, excited to have you all back. We kind of started this conversation at HIMSS a number of months ago. Excited to extend that. Everyone should go check that out on Healthcare IT Today. You can see our live conversation that we did with a number of other people at HIMSS. But for those that maybe missed that, Sandra, how about you start? Tell us a little bit about yourself and Dell Technologies.
Yeah, no, thank you again for having us. I'm excited for our conversation and continuing the effort. Dell focuses in healthcare and really helps providers to improve patient outcomes with AI-driven diagnostics and secure data management and technology that really helps modernize infrastructure, streamlines care delivery, and improves operations. It's all about delivering value and the outcomes that so many of our healthcare systems need today. So that's what we focus on.
Awesome. Dan, how about yourself and NVIDIA?
Yeah, thanks, John. Dan Schneider here. Obviously, NVIDIA, we're a hardware company from a GPU perspective, but we're so much more beyond that, especially in the healthcare life sciences. We do an awful lot of work in developing various inferencing microservices and playbooks and things like that to help further optimize various workloads so that we can break through science as fast as possible.
Yeah. It's funny. I probably didn't even need intros to NVIDIA and Dell. Everyone knows you, but it's great to hear at least where you're focused in healthcare, which is nice. But Sandra, how are health systems using AI today to improve imaging workflows, across the edge, data centers, hybrid environments, beyond just like making the, faster image reads?
Yeah, healthcare systems today are using AI for much more than those faster reads, right? At the edge, we're supporting time-sensitive triage, like and image quality checks and workflow decisions that are really close to the patient. But also then in the data center, we're helping to automate study routing and work list prioritization, clinical findings, and integration back into the packs so that workflows just run more smoothly and radiologists, can do their jobs right alongside the care teams. In hybrid environments, I also see that AI really lets organizations help keep latency sensitive tasks really local, right? While using their cloud connected resources and collaboration archives, for remote reading and broader analytics overall. But the biggest shift has really been through kind of standalone algorithms and connected workflow platforms. All of these are improving throughput, right? They're reducing manual handoffs. They're strengthening governance and really making imaging operations more consistent across sites and specialties. So I really think from my vantage point, really the story is that AI is in medical imaging is moving from that narrow speed the read to a use case that is an end-to-end workflow enabler.
Yeah. I mean, I think you described what's so challenging for CIOs and CTOs today, which is I need to make sure that I have the right process happening in the right location so that my
Yeah.
costs don't just balloon, right? Whether that's cloud, whether that's on-prem, whether it's at the edge, whatever it might be. Dan,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but also like which imaging AI use cases are showing that clearest operational or clinical ROI, because to these leaders, that is going to be key, right? Like I need it in the right place that returns an ROI that doesn't just drive my costs up because I'm using all this compute power. So, how does that underlying infrastructure, however you configure it, how does that affect kind of this speed to value for an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think, layering on top of what Sandy said, I mean, not all workloads need frontier models, right? There's an awful lot of different models out there, and deciding what model you need for that workload will help you decide whether it's a cloud, edge, or hybrid environment. But we are seeing a significant shift to the hybrid and even onto the on-prem, kind of bringing the AI to the data, right at the edge. Some of the ROIs that we're really seeing, certainly, Sandy mentioned time sensitive scanning, high volume scanning. Those are definitely areas that probably have some of the best immediate ROI. But we're even seeing some companies utilize GPU workstations and other solutions like the Dell Pro Max GB10 to assist with procedure room scans.
Mhm.
Ultimately, we can't always rely that the cloud is going to be there. We're seeing many areas, not just within the U.S., but with outside of the U.S., certainly rural type environments, but other countries that just can't rely on internet bandwidth speeds. And when you have these latency critical tasks, local edge like solutions like the Dell Pro Max with GB10 can be very beneficial.
Interesting. You gave a couple criteria that I think people use to decide, like, where should their image AI run? Should it be on the workstations at the edge or in the hospital data center, or should it be in the cloud or some multi-cloud? Like, what would you say are some of the other criteria? You gave some, do you have good bandwidth, right? Like that's one. What other criteria would you offer them as they kind of evaluate, oh, maybe this should be on-prem or even at the edge?
Yeah, great question. Certainly, like I mentioned, the overall workflow requirements around latency. Currently, PHI governance is another big one. Obviously, cost has to play into factor. Obviously, if somebody had all the money in the world, they probably would run it on the best and biggest models all the time. But as we start seeing agents start coordinating a lot of these tasks as well, I think the key criteria is going to become control.
Mhm.
You may want to run that agentic orchestration close enough to the data and the overall clinical workflow to act quickly, but also ensuring audit trails, human in the loop checkpoints, certainly overall policy controls around every AI call.
Sandra, what would you add as far as the criteria of where people should look? And feel free to chime in on the ROI side as well.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with everything that Dan said around the criteria, right? Latency, data gravity, the integration complexity, governance, and scale, right? And we need to make sure that we maintain that goal of flexibility of the environment, making sure that we're being mindful of latency, and all of those pieces. But I do also want to make sure that as AI agents start kind of coordinating these tasks and the image flow, that it really is a decision and a decision getting to kind of that ROI around less of a single runtime or a location, but overall about what is trying to be driven around that function. So just, really having and encouraging institutions to think about where that workload is happening, what kind of orchestration needs to happen, where that data needs to stay or be accessible, and the execution that needs to be conducted to make sure that they are really getting the ROI of their investment.
Yeah. I think one of the other challenges is that, like, image volumes and even the resolution of the images is continuing to grow at this massive rate, which is great. I mean, it's great we have more data available, but like, what would you say are some of the biggest infrastructure and even workflow challenges that you're seeing in regards to even things like modality, edge workstations, and the PAX kind of VNA layers as well? Maybe Sandra, you could start and then Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think to kick off, the biggest challenge is really just the growth in imaging volume. It's being matched by the growth in imaging size and in workflow complexity, and also expectations in turnaround time, right? And at the modality layer, organizations are really dealing with these larger studies and more data generated per exam, and that increasing pressure to really move images quickly without disrupting any of the acquisition or slowing down the technologists at all, right? We want to speed them up, actually. But I think the edge workstation, the strain is often on local compute and memory and and GPU capacity, right? Especially when we're looking at some of these advanced visualizations, AI inferencing, and multiple applications that are all running at the same time for the radiologist, right? And at the PAX and VNA layers, the challenge shifts to scale and interoperability and lifecycle management. So, I think institutions really need to kind of store, retrieve, and route much larger data sets across their sites, right? But being able to really keep that, the performance consistent, just to avoid any kind of bottlenecks from the network or any kind of workflow orchestration. So I think that's going to be something we need to be really mindful of, especially as more AI is being introduced, and making sure that it's we're looking at that whole workflow and not just kind of storage and viewing.
Yeah, Dan, what would you add to that? I mean, and then Sandra brings up the next point, which is how, what else is needed to support these new AI-driven imaging workflows as well? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as Sandra mentioned, the volumes of images and the resolution, which is great, is getting bigger and better. And it's obviously growing faster than infrastructure can keep up with. I think some of the hard problems, especially around the VNA layers, are the data movement, making sure you get the right data to the right location, making sure that the metadata consistency is there, and ultimately deciding which AI workloads you want to run close to the scanner or maybe on the archive level. Ultimately, I mentioned orchestration a couple of times, and I think that's where some of the agents could be an area that really are beneficial in the future. How do we get that right study, maybe the prior result of a similar scan to a radiologist as fast as possible? Agentic workflows are just becoming more interesting in helping coordinate all these across all the systems.
Interesting. I think it is an interesting challenge. We have explosion of all the data. We have all the AI starting to be layered on it, but I kind of look at that. Is that why multi-cloud and the hybrid architectures are becoming so important? Is because you need to be able to put the right workflow, the right AI, solution in the right platform. Is that what you kind of see, Sandra, from your end, as far as how they're kind of evaluating where to put it, and also, to make sure that they're optimizing the environment they're in, even though probably on the back end they're trying to standardize on GPUs and SDKs at the same time, right? Talk about that kind of balancing that as a leader.
Yeah, I mean, it's the challenge is real, right? And I think that systems or health systems in general really need to kind of shift from running that one single inference task to kind of that coordinated of running the whole real-time workflows, right, for their institutions, and helping balance, right, to your point. And I don't think there's just one answer to fit all, right? I think that I encourage institutions to really think about their AI model, the infrastructure, kind of how agentic AI, the agentic AI workflow in particular, is going to be applied, and how they can look at that chain of activities across their models, across their data sources, orchestration layers, and their clinical systems, right? Which is really important on that tail end. I think for organizations to move fast through this, they have to really design for both AI execution, but also that enterprise workflow orchestration together all at the same time.
Yeah. Dan, I think it's interesting to see what's happening and how quickly AI is working, but NVIDIA is pushing out so many solutions, right? Like, operationally, what does it take for an organization to move their imaging AI from maybe an isolated, pilot that's working on some cool NVIDIA solution that maybe works locally, to kind of moving it to this production at enterprise scale and being able to leverage a consistent platform, through the data center and throughout the cloud in an organization? Like, what are you seeing there as far as moving? Sometimes I guess there could be an ICD-9 code for pilot-itis, right? Or something, we have pilot, but how do you move from pilot to full scale implementation? What are you seeing from organizations?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's not typically a technical challenge, right? It's the overall organizational structure, making sure you have the right KPIs and making sure you have the right folks who are signing off on the different levels during these pilots to production. one of the things that we really believe in when we're looking at, doing pilots of anything is ultimately you have a person in charge, and really the mission is the boss of getting that pilot to production. And it's not so much, where do you sit on the hierarchy within the company of helping getting, those pilots to production. One of our goals at NVIDIA in general is to provide the platform. We really consider ourselves a platform company to develop and deploy on, whether it's at the desk or into the data center or into the cloud. Very similar solutions. You have things like MONAI, a medical open network for AI, which is going to help health systems move imaging AI from isolated workstation pilots over to production with a consistent framework for medical imaging, validation of the models, deployment, and overall integration. That's just one example of things that we're developing and offering for folks to develop on, whether it's, again, data center, cloud, or at the desk.
Yeah. I mean, to Dan's point, and we kind of started off with this in some ways, like imaging AI is moving from workflow optimization into other things, precision medicine, real-time clinical decision making. There's lots happening. What kind of AI infrastructure do you think health systems will need? Like, Sandra, you talk with a lot of organizations. What do they need to make sure that they're future ready, I guess, is one way to kind of look at it with their investments that they're making today that they're going to need to use for a number of years.
Yeah, it's a great point. From the conversations that we're having with customers, our point of view at Dell is that health systems are going to need AI infrastructure that is not just powerful, but it's governed, it's available in real time, it's available, right? As imaging AI moves closer to that precision medicine and that clinical decision support, the requirement really shifts from an isolated inference to really a coordinated execution across data, across models, applications, and ultimately the care pathway. I really see that it means that the infrastructure has to support secure access to multimodal data, allow for low latency inference, allow for interoperability with all clinical systems, and provide an orchestration that can really manage the AI agents acting across all of those workflows, right? And at scale, it's about winning the architecture that will likely be that design that Dan just talked about, right? A GPU enabled resources on the edge for that fast local response, right? But having core platforms in the data center that are going to integrate for control and allow for cloud capable environments for that elastic scale and operational models and even most importantly, continuous improvement. So I guess just as important, health systems are really going to need a common software and governance layer across those environments so that the agentic AI can be deployed and be monitored, audited, and really like updated safely. So I guess at the end, really the future infrastructure is less about a local or a single location rather, but really a compute that's more intelligent. It's ready with that kind of clinical AI fabric and can be supported, trusted, and available for real-time decision making across the entire enterprise.
Yeah, and I imagine you share that perspective. I mean, NVIDIA is a platform company, as you described, Is that kind of what you would suggest to people as they look ahead and they try to, plan their AI infrastructure to be able to support the future needs?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and that is what the beauty is of having these various environments. I mean, in several conversations I've had recently with, AI leaders, where does the cloud fit well for some of their use cases, right? One of the things that we've continued to see, as you mentioned earlier, is all these new AI models that are continuously coming out, and how do we test them and how do we evaluate whether they're going to be a benefit for whatever workload it might be. And that's where things like the cloud can be very beneficial. You can burst up an environment, you can test out, a new model and see if it's something that is a benefit to your environment. And then, really, run it on your core on-prem environment. Ideally, it's something that you did plan for some growth, of course, But I think that a lot of the folks that are planning true AI factories are developing in that capability. And when they need to, burst up, they can, and then get back to their core on-prem environment. And then not to forget, just the overall AI development workloads too. Those can be done at your desk. A lot of these type of evaluations of lower level models or just fine tuning workloads don't need to be using up tokens in the cloud or into your data center. They can be at the desk where the power is more efficient and it's not as time sensitive before you deploy it up into the data center.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think that's maybe the biggest challenge is we have a plethora of opportunities and navigating them is the key and understanding them. So I appreciate both of you taking time to share your perspectives and insights since you live, breathe, eat, and sleep it every day, I think. So thanks so much for talking with us and sharing your insights and perspectives. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcasting applications. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Dan.